Hello everyone. Today I would like to discuss about what morality really is, because it's not obvious what it is, right? It's not obvious that morality or ethics or values even exist. If the world is just material objects, right? So with a modern scientific paradigm where everything in the world is just atoms, particles, or like quants, whatever they're called, right? I don't know what quantum particles are called, right? But if everything is just physical matter, then is there such thing as morality? What is morality, right? And so I would say that morality is basically a value judgment, right? And so what is a value judgment? It's basically the expression of a desired outcome. So that's what morality is, right? Morality is the rank ordering of outcomes, right? So it always, a moral system always implies a hierarchy, right? So if you have a moral perspective, you say that you want one outcome over another. So that's basically what morality is. But that might not be the conventional understanding. So I'm going to visit the conventional understanding first, and then I'm going to explain why it's wrong, and then we're going to hopefully discern a greater understanding of morality by the end of this video. Okay, so there's basically, you can say there's two kinds of morality. There's two kinds of views of morality. You can say there's the subjective view of morality, and then there's the objective view, right? And here, obviously, moral relativism goes here. I'll explain after I put everything here. Okay. Right. I mean, that's pretty extensive. I think I covered everything, right? That's comprehensive. Okay. Or objective morality. So there's definitely religious morality, right? They would definitely say it's objective, even transcendental, right? So transcendental morality, which basically is the same thing as, but universal morality, right? And universal, transcendental, basically is the same thing in practice. What else? Rational morality, okay. I guess consensus morality, right? Or democratic morality, same thing, right? So these are, I think this covers like basically all morality, right? Or right, so these are the two different categories of morality. And so let me explain all of them briefly, right? So what would a religious morality be? Well, this religious morality typically just means whatever God says is good, you have to agree with God, right? If you disagree with God, you're just wrong. Same thing with transcendental. Like if you somehow have a transcendental moral claims without a God, then once again you're saying, okay, these transcendental values are right, and because they're transcendental, right, they're superior to any competing claims. Okay, so so it's basically the same thing. So universal morality is like this is a moral. Let's say I have a rule that's universalizable. So like a rule such as no one should kill anyone. Okay, so a rule like this, right, is a universalizable rule. And a universal moralist would say that this is a rule which ought be universally applied, right? So really, all of these are the same thing, because if you're saying that a value judgment or a moral normative claim is objective, then you're saying that it should be universally applied. You should always do this instead of the opposite, right? Otherwise, it's not a moral system, right? If you have a moral, right? If your perspective is that, okay, you can just do whatever you want, right? At that point, you're over here, okay? Yeah, so rational morality, right? Let's think about that, right? So rational morality means that you can reason your way into a moral system, right? You can make rational arguments in favor of some moral systems, and a moral rationalist will say that, okay, right, like my value judgments are based on reason, and if you disagree with me, you're wrong, right? You're illogical, right? And so consensus morality, democratic morality, they would somehow say that if most people or like all the experts agree on something, then it's like somehow objective, right? Yeah, I mean, actually, this should go here. So this would go into moral relativism. To be honest, I mean, everyone can agree on something doesn't mean it's right. Like, you know, everyone can agree on slavery. Everyone can agree that murdering people is good, right? So this isn't even a view. Okay, so like this is just it's captured in moral relativism, right? So this is just here. Yeah, so let's forget about that, right? So let's explain a bit about subjective morality, right? So moral nihilism just means that there's no objective morality, right? It means that any moral claim you make, they would either say it's false or that it has no inherent truth value, right? So maybe they would say morality is just an expression of your emotions, right? It's like how you feel about something. That's all morality is, right? Whereas people with objective morality, they'll say, okay, they're actually true moral propositions, or there's like true ways of behavior. Just like morally valid ways of behaving and existing in the world, and there's invalid ways of existing in the world, right? They would say this is objectively true, whereas people who are moral subjectivists, they will say no. It depends on perspective, or it just doesn't matter. Like the question, it's not even a relevant question, right? Like, so someone who's a moral nihilist, if you tell them that you should do this, right, and this is correct, they will simply say that you're speaking nonsense. It's like you're saying 1 + 1 is 5, right? So to a moral nihilist, if you're making a moral proposition, it's like you're trying to say, it's like you're talking about the fourth side of a triangle, or you're talking about, you know, right? It's like you're talking about green to a colorblind person, right? He would not recognize it. Or like, or like, imagine if you multiply a number by 0, right? So let's say 5 times 0, and then you somehow say, oh, 5 times 0 is 100, right? And then you start talking about this, like, let's say if you have 5 apples, okay, 5 apples times 0, that's 0 apples, right? But then you say, okay, 5 times 0 apples, that's actually 100 apples. And then you start talking about the 100 apples, you start weighing the 100 apples and like thinking about how much they weigh, or like saying that, you know, we got to start giving away these apples. Like the moral nihilist would be like, hold on, you multiply by 0, right? So they would say the morality is a 0, right? It's not. What are you talking about? Like, you're talking about something that doesn't exist, basically. And moral relativist, the only difference with a moral relativist is like, okay, so you know, yeah, morality exists, but it's like it depends on your perspective, right? So they're basically the same as nihilists, just really no difference. I'm gonna be honest, okay? They'll just say, okay, if you feel a certain way, then it's true, right? If someone else feels a certain way, it's true for them, right? So like something that's true for me might not be true for you, right? But moral nihilists and moral relativists are the same thing. I think these are the same thing. I think there's no difference, okay? Because even someone who's a moral nihilist, I don't think they'll deny that the word morality exists, right? And the word is referring to something. They would say, so if you're like an error theorist, right? If you believe in the error theory of morality, that's like some anti-realism or whatever, right? So basically you'll say that the category of morality does not exist, right? So what does the word refer to then, right? Well, the word refers to maybe a set of emotional expressions. Maybe, you know, maybe the word morality would refer to like, I don't know, stimuli that makes you happy or sad or whatever, right? But okay, if morality, so if the word morality just captures, you know, derivatives of emotions, right? If the word morality is only referring to derivatives of emotional states, right? And therefore it's not objective category, it doesn't really matter, okay? Like, even if a moral nihilist is saying, oh, morality doesn't objectively exist, there's no moral objects there in the universe, right? The word morality still refers to emotional concepts. And if a word is referring to something, then that's still a category, right? You could categorize the emotional the emotional expressions, and therefore morality is still a category, even if it's just a subjective one, right? So, and a moral relativist would basically say the same thing. They'll say people have different emotional preferences, right? And therefore they have different emotional whims, therefore they have different morality. So moral relativism and moral nihilism are practically the same, so there's no difference here, right? Now let's think about objective morality. So every objective morality, all of these are basically saying, okay, there's just one thing that's true, right? This is the entire universe, right? And then, okay, maybe this is a bad example. This will be better, okay? So there's a set of possible actions that you can take, okay? Or there's a set of possible actions that can occur and be carried out, right? And then there's objectively true ones, and then there's objectively false ones, right? So like let's say, for example, murder, okay? It's wrong. Theft, okay? I think people usually agree, right? It's bad. It's just violence, right? In general, right? Let's just say, for example, right? Sorry, trying to make this, but there we go. And let's say false. Wait, okay, I got it wrong. Okay, I thought. Okay, charity. Okay, you give money to charity, right? This murder is here. Okay. What most people say is morally true. Oh, love thy neighbor. Okay, be real cliche. Sure, love. Okay. Once again, very cliche. And then what's false? Okay. All right. So false would be like violence. What else? Insults. Okay. This is just an example. Okay. So let's say that someone who believes in objective morality, well, they'll say, okay, so there's a set of possible actions that can take place, and if you do any of these things, you're good. If you do any of these things, you're bad. Okay. So if you do these things, you're right. You do these things, you're wrong. Okay. And they'll say that this is objectively true. Right. So what does that actually mean? Because, if you're adhering to a materialist worldview, then where are you locating morality? Right. So it's very strange, it's as if there's like a rock floating somewhere in space, maybe just a rock like orbiting around Jupiter, okay? And this rock is like the objectively true moral commandments of the universe, okay? So if you adhere to them, then you're correct. If you don't adhere to them, you're wrong, okay? And so what exactly happens if you follow or don't follow them, right? I don't know, but maybe you get like struck by lightning if you do the wrong thing. So, so first of all, we don't have epistemic certainty, right? We're not certain about the nature of the universe. But even with this specific case, right, we're not certain that objective moral rules exist, right? We're not certain objective morality exists. So and if they do exist, like where are they, right? How do you know? But let's say that we did have epistemic certainty, okay? Let's say for the sake of argument that we do know what the objective moral claims are, okay? We know what the objectively true ethics are. And maybe it's the 10 Commandments or something, right? So even then, that still begs the question, why should you follow them, right? So why ought I be good rather than evil, right? Why ought I do X instead of Y? So even if you're telling me that if I do X, so even if you say X is morally, objectively correct, why should I do what you tell me to do? Like, why should I do it, right? What is going to happen? Like, why? Like, why? Am I going to teleport out of existence if I don't abide by the objectively correct rules? Like, is that what? So, and then, if someone's religious, they might threaten you with hell, right? And but even at that point, if I'm only adhering to your moral beliefs to avoid going to hell, that's not really an indication that I even care about morality. That's just me wanting to save my own skin, right? So really, all of this is basically nonsense because none of it really matters. It's just pedantic. Right? It's just very pedantic, right? It's just pointless discussion. So let's gain a more clear and veracious understanding of what morality is. Right? Morality is about maximizing outcomes. Right? Maximizing particular outcomes. Sorry, I'm misspelling this. Maximizing. Okay, move this. Okay, yeah. Maximizing particular. Right. So, and so this is a better understanding of what morality is, right? And people will say, and so this is so basically every moral system is a form of consequentialism, right? Every moral system. And so what are the alternatives to consequentialism exactly? Deontology, or just deontology. There's, I guess, utilitarianism. I guess these are the main forms, right? Right. So, what is deontology? Deontology means adhere to a set of rules always. So it's a duty-based ethic, okay? Deontology means you have a duty to do X instead of Y always, right? So it's basically, a deontologist would say that there's a correct rule set and you must abide by them, right? And obviously, there's many criticisms you can level here. Like, first of all, this seems like slave morality, right? Like only a slave would believe in such a duty-based ethic. But another issue is this leads to absurdities. Like, you should only do X, okay? But what if doing that, leads to everyone getting murdered and tortured, right? So like, there's bad outcomes. So like, should you just do it, right? They would say yes, okay? But in any case, okay, deontology is still just a form of consequentialism, right? Because everyone following the duties, everyone following the deontological principles that you want them to follow, if everyone does that, right, that's a consequence. That's an outcome that you want, right? So deontology is just a form of consequentialism. So it's really an unnecessary category. Like, we need to forget about this, right? Utilitarianism means maximizing utility or maximizing happiness or whatever, right? It's maximizing some outcome. So it's really just a form of consequentialism. It's not, yeah. And what other types of like moralities are there? What's this? Let's see. Prudential. Meta ethics. Prescriptive applied ethics. Okay, consequence-based, duty-based, contract-based, character-based. So all of these are just forms of consequentialism. So like a character-based, so virtue ethics, okay? What's virtue ethics? So it's about what? Moral development, moral education. Okay, so that's an outcome, which means virtue ethics is another form of consequentialism. Contract-based, rights. Well, like social contract? It's still just, that's still an outcome. So all morality is reduced into outcomes, and therefore every form of morality and ethics is a consequentialist form, okay? So, yeah, so then the question is, what outcomes should we maximize, right? That's a question of morality. Well, I think we know like generally what the main answers are. Okay. So, what outcomes should we maximize? Right. So the obvious one that comes to mind is like social or political consequentialism or utilitarianism, right? Same thing. Utilitarianism. Okay, so you could say the collective good. Right. And then there's the individual good. Okay, so this would be, I guess, egoism. And then this would be religious devotion. Okay. Right, so yeah, sorry if I'm pausing a lot because I don't have a script and I'm not reading off anything. I'm just going off the dome. Yeah. So what is a morality founded on religious devotion? Well, obviously, this would be like, okay, if you're adhering to Christianity or Islam or Judaism or any religion, right? There's a set of rules that you must follow. And why should you follow them, right? Because it will bring you closer to God and it will bring you in alignment with the values of God, right? And why should you do this? Well, there's two reasons. So question of why? Why follow God's rules? Okay, because it is right. And to go to heaven and avoid hell. Okay, so you can obviously agree with both, but so let's think about this. So obviously, if someone believes that God exists, then by definition, God's morality is correct. So what God says goes, right? If God says do XYZ, then you must do XYZ because it's the correct, it's the only valid and defensible position, right? Right, but the problem is that this reason alone, it has no binding force, right? Because, like, let's imagine that you can do the opposite of everything that God tells you to do. So God tells you must do X, Y, Z. God gives you a set of commandments and dictates that you must follow, right? And you do the complete opposite of them. So you break all of God's rules. But let's say that God sends you to heaven and he sends his followers to hell. So imagine this scenario where, okay, God lays down the rules, right? Let's say the 10 Commandments, for example, or any rules. Okay, so God exists, and then he tells everyone what his expectations are and how you must behave. Let's say that everyone except one person follows what God tells them to do, right? So everyone except one, so just 100 people, okay? 99% of them are the rule followers of God, and the 1% is the rule breaker of God, right? So most people are devotees to God, right? They're very fervent followers of God. They're peists. And then there's one guy who's a rule breaker, a sinner, okay? So let's imagine a scenario where God rewards the sinner and actually punishes the people who follow him. Okay, so let's imagine this, right? So the 99% of people who actually abided by what God told them to do, and this will be very difficult, right? You gotta pray a certain amount of times every day. You have to restrict your diet. You have to restrict your relationships, right? You have to restrict your entire lifestyle to be in alignment with God's will. But let's say that all the 99 people who did act in the way that God prescribed to act, right? Let's say that God punished those people, okay? So let's say that, okay, so look, right? So there's the I maybe make this text a bit smaller. So it's the 99 followers of God, and then there's the one sinner. Okay. So let's say that God sends all of his actual followers to hell, right? So all the people who were like, "Hey, I love you, God. I pray to you every day. Please have mercy on me. I never sinned in my life," right? So the people who never sinned, people who were pious devotees to God, let's say God sends them all to hell, right? Because he has the right to, right? I mean, if God created everything, then presumably, not only does he have the physical capacity, like the power to, force everyone to go to heaven, but supposedly he has the moral right? Because everyone is his property, right? So let's say that God decides to send the one sinner to heaven, okay? So this would seem absurd, right? Because if everyone knew this in advance, if everyone knew in advance that God would send the biggest sinners to heaven and God would send the most pious devotees, the most committed and, self-restrained people to hell, right? If God, right, this would, like, if it was the case that you restricted your entire lifestyle to follow God's commandments and you go to hell, but if you just sinned and went against God's law instead and went to heaven, right? Like, if this was the case, then who's going to? I mean, who is actually going to adhere to the rules that God set? Like, who would do this, right? So really, this is a nothing burger. Okay, this is a distraction. The idea that people adhere to God's rules or God's supposed laws because they think, oh, it's right, therefore I'll do it because it's right? And this is just deontology, right? So deontology is nonsense because I've shown you the absurdity of God rewarding the sinners and punishing the followers, okay? So being devoted to God just because it's right, that's not actually a reason, okay? We're just gonna ignore that for now, forever, and just delete it, right? We're going to completely nullify. We're just going to but we're going to evict this entire idea from the argument, right? It's just nonsense, okay? So okay, why should we follow God's rules, right? To go to heaven and to avoid hell, right? So that's why. And let's think about this, right? Let's think about what hell is and hell and heaven is, okay? Right, so heaven, hell, right? So I assume this is eternal hellfire, eternal fire, okay? And perpetual suffering. Right. And then here's communion with God. Endless joy. Okay. So You want to go to heaven instead of hell, right? Presumably. But the issue is that, let's say you do the right things, okay? You do everything God tells you to do, and you end up in heaven, okay? So maybe at first, you really enjoy going to heaven, right? You really enjoy being in heaven. But it depends on which heaven. So, if you go to the Christian heaven, it's not gonna be as exciting, right? Because you're just gonna pray to God every day. You're gonna have some feasts, right? I don't know. You're gonna hang out with angels, and they're gonna blow trumpets or something. You're gonna look at the clouds, and there's gonna be sunshine. You get to take a walk around the grass near the kingdom of heaven, I guess. So the Christian heaven is kind of boring, but let's say the Islamic heaven is much better. You go to Jannah, right? Or what I think it's called Jannah, yeah. You could do whatever you want, apparently. You could literally do whatever you want. I'm pretty sure, yeah, you need to worship, the God of Islam, right? But besides that, you can do anything except, rescue your family members who are in hell. And wait, I think maybe you can. I think. But I don't think you can rescue every. I'm not a Islamic scholar, okay? But if you're in Islamic heaven, I'm pretty sure you can't rescue everyone from hell and bring them to heaven, right? I think maybe you can to some extent. I don't know, okay? But just to steelman the religious case, I will assume that Islamic heaven is the heaven people talk about, because the thing is, Islamic heaven is far superior to any religion's heaven that I know about. Right, it's because you can do anything basically. Well, not everything, and I'll explain why later. So yeah, and then you go to hell. Obviously, this is just a prison, right? Hell is just a prison because you're completely confined to burn, right? To suffer. So people don't want to go to hell because it's a prison, right? You're constrained by the circumstances, and because there's continuous suffering. But I'm going to explain to you why heaven is actually also a prison, and why it will eventually become suffering. So if you go to heaven, maybe for a day, if you visit heaven for a day, a week, a month, maybe you'll be happy, right? You could do what you want, right? You can feast on grapes, eat steak every day, right? You could have 72 virgins, right? You can even eat from that forbidden fruits or whatever, right? You can do whatever you want. You can build temples and build roller coasters and have a blast. But eventually you will get bored. I mean, and so you're still constrained in heaven. Even in heaven, you're constrained by your by consciousness itself, because consciousness is inherently miserable, right? Why do we want to change the world? It's because we have a sense of felt unease. It's because we're inherently miserable, which is what makes us conscious. Consciousness itself is misery. So as long as you're conscious, you're going to be miserable. And so, no amount of supposedly positive experience is going to amend that, right? And even if you're in heaven, right, your dopamine system is going to normalize. It's going to regulate. It's going to get used to the happiness you experience. So you'll just be bored eventually. No matter what kind of pleasure you experience in heaven, you're gonna get bored of it, unless your consciousness is forcibly modified by God, such that you're forced to experience happiness, basically, right? But at that point, this would basically be slavery, because you're just being forced. You're forced to feel joy against your will. And the problem is, if there's no contradicting force of misery, then there is also no joy. So you would just be experiencing something, right? But you would just be a parasite. You would just be on a roller coaster continuously, right? You're wow, you're in heaven, this is happy, right? But you don't have any freedom. You don't have even a sense of agency, right? You don't have a sense of purpose, right? In heaven, because you're forced to be happy. It's like someone's making you happy at gunpoint, except it's not gunpoint. It's just you literally, it's like if your brain was unable to feel sadness, right? And just God just forced you to be happy. How is this actually heaven? How is this actually a paradise? This is actually another prison. Okay, you're trapped and you're forced to be happy. This is actually, you're being held hostage in heaven. I don't know why. I don't know how you can enjoy this. And you're forced to pray to the same God that you spent your life already praying to, right? So you're basically a slave in heaven. Anyway, so I don't see how heaven is really much better than hell. It's you're still constrained, right? Another thing is that, if you're in heaven, you can't rescue everyone from hell, right? Maybe you can rescue a few people depending on how good of a person you were, right? But if you, let's say you wanted to throw a party and you wanted to invite everyone from hell and bring them to heaven, I don't think God would let you do this, right? So, God is still the absolute landlord of heaven, right? So you still don't have freedom in heaven, right? This is not. So really, heaven is just another prison. And I don't know why people treat heaven as like this amazing end goal where you're just going to be perfectly happy. No, it's not. It's not utopia, right? You're still constrained. So heaven is a prison, hell is a prison, and heaven is still a prison, right? So these. So I mean, you think, God is gonna put me into heaven, right? And then He's gonna force me to be happy, and somehow this is a utopia. No, this is not a utopia. This is you're being enslaved. You are being held as a hostage against your will. You think, it's my will. No, my will is to be a slave to God. Okay, I mean, fair enough. I mean, if you believe that, but I mean, I don't. But it's just not sufficient for me, right? Like, because you still exist within a set of constraints, even in heaven. So the fact that you are constrained, we're always constrained, for example, by the law of identity, right? The law of non-contradiction. You can't be both yourself and not yourself, right? You can't be A and not A, right? So the fact that you exist and that you're always constrained no matter what, even if you're in heaven, right, is proof that you're always in a prison. So that's really why I think this religious morality is insufficient. Okay, it doesn't explain it. Like, even this heaven and hell narrative where, okay, you do the right things, you go to heaven, you do the wrong things, you go to hell, right? This is not sufficient, because even if you maximize the putatively correct outcome, I go to heaven, right? That's the correct outcome. So what? You're still constrained, right, by existence itself. You're still constrained by the nature of existence and by God's power. So you're so constrained because you are confined, right? Because you are not the omnipotent one, obviously. Then, you're constrained, and therefore you're still in a prison. And so really, heaven and hell are, over time, heaven and hell will blend into the same thing. They are the same thing, right? Like, so like, rather than thinking of heaven and hell as like opposites, they're really just the same experience, except inverted, right? But you spend 1,000,000 years in heaven, it's gonna feel the exact same like 1,000,000,000 years in hell, right? Because it's just a prolonged existence, and existence is misery. Existence is, as we know it. But even if God like basically drugs you and forces you to feel happy, right? Even 1,000,000 years of happiness, I mean, to me that seems identical to misery, right? Because you're still constrained. So as long as you exist, you will exist constrained, and as long as you exist constrained, you're in a prison. Therefore, heaven and hell are both prisons, right? So we're gonna have to. This is not a sufficient morality for me. It's not good enough. Okay, I'm not pleased by this. So let's think about the collective good, right? So like, this would be like some utopian morality where, like, okay, so we want the world to be a certain way. We want society to be structured a certain way so that everyone can be happy, so that everyone, think of like communism, for example. Like, everyone will have enough to eat, everyone can do whatever they want. Everyone will be prosperous and happy, and everyone will be treated justly and ethically, right? The issue with the collective good is that the only reason people care about the collective good is because they themselves, as an individual, care, right? So, you assume collectivism is the opposite of selfishness, but I would say no. Collectivism is another form of selfishness, right? Because I selfishly want the collective good, right? I want everyone to be happy, right? That is my selfish will, right? That's an individual will. So there's really no such thing as this. This is an unnecessary category, right? So we get rid of this category, and so we're left with egoism. Okay, we're left with the individual good. And when we're left with this, right, this what is the principle that we should follow then? Because I've already showed you that that the religious morality, yes, at best will bring you to heaven, right? But there's many issues to this. First of all, you don't have epistemic certainty of which God is true, right? So you worship the wrong God, you might go to hell anyways, right? So that's not an issue. But let's say even if somehow you did know, you knew perfectly well which God existed, and then you did all the right things, you made all the right prayers and sacrifices, and did all the right rituals, and devoted your life perfectly, and went to heaven. You're still in a prison, right? You're still in prison. You're still imprisoned in heaven because you exist, and if you exist, you exist as a constrained, limited being, right? So, I mean, even if you're a god, right? Yeah, you're omnipotent, but you're still constrained because, like, presumably God can't do everything, right? Because God has a nature. I mean, that's a completely. Then you go into a completely different argument. Like, if let's say God is omnibenevolent, right? Because people will assume that God is morally perfect, right? Therefore, God can do no wrong. Okay, but that also means that God can't do whatever he wants. God is constrained by his omnibenevolent nature. So even if you're God, you can't do whatever you want, right? So like if you're constrained, even if you were God, then you would be even more constrained if you are just a follower of God who made it to heaven, right? So you're still constrained in heaven as long as you exist in heaven. So the religious morality says you should do the right things to go to heaven, right? But when you go to heaven, you're going to be constrained forever anyways. You're still going to be in a prison. It's not going to be much better than hell over time, right? Over a long enough period of time. So really, this religious morality is insufficient, right? It's not good enough for me. All right, so we need something better, right? And we're left with the individual good, egoism, right? Which could be anything, which could really be anything, because this itself is just a fact of what morality is. Unless you believe that you can experience the world not as an individual but as a collective consciousness, or somehow you can somehow integrate all of the different consciousnesses. The individual consciousness. Well, what's the plural of consciousness? Consciousness is, bro. Consciousness is. Is that even a word? Consciousness is. Okay, so let's say that you can somehow integrate all of the different individual consciousnesses into one consciousness. This would still be an individual hive mind, right? This would still be egoism. This would still be an individual perspective, and therefore you would still want to maximize an individual good. But I don't know why you would want to be in a hive mind and just be subjugated to the consensus of everyone else, unless like somehow you perfectly agree with everyone. Like if everyone agreed with each other, then there's no moral conflict. There's no need for the concept of morality if everyone agreed with each other about what's good anyways, right? But the fact that we disagree, that's the only reason we have morality. But if we disagree, we wouldn't need to be in the hive mind together anyways. But like, let's say you're pure collectivist. Okay, you want everyone to be in the hive mind. You want everyone to be a slave of the consensus. Okay, why is this, bro? How can you possibly look yourself in the mirror? I mean, this is disgusting. I mean, and this is still, it's still your individual preference. It's your individual desire that everyone should be in a collective where everyone's perfectly getting along. We're dancing with the hippies, and we're like, I don't know, even the trees are dancing. We're like, I don't know, we're like singing around a campfire, and like we're just like all holding hands. It's all happy, right? But this is still an individual desire, right? So every form of morality is ultimately a form of egoism, okay? And I'll stand by this. And so, what should the individual do, right? Because even if you say, okay, even if you're making a collective argument like, oh, everyone should adhere to the same thing, okay, if you're making this argument, then at that point everyone is the same person. You're just forcing everyone into one mega mind, right? You're like putting all the brains together and turning 100 brains into one brain. Okay, that's a form of egoism as far as I'm concerned. That's individualism. You're just forcing your individual desires onto everyone else. It's very totalitarian, actually, right? Okay, we're left with moral egoism, which is the only coherence perspective, right? So what are the options we have, right? Okay, so what morality should you adhere to? Right, this is you. Well, there's only really three options, right? There's three options. There's elevatum, which is endless ascent on the value hierarchy. Okay, and then there's stagnatum, remaining the same position on the value hierarchy. And then there's descendum, like right. So we have to presuppose that there is a value hierarchy. I mean, every moral claim does, right? If I'm making a moral claim and I say these set of actions are right and these set of actions are wrong, I'm saying that the set of actions which is right is superior to the other set. Therefore, there's a hierarchy, right? And so, obviously, if there's a value hierarchy, then moving up on the value hierarchy is superior to moving down or staying in the same place, right? So we discount this. This is all heresy, right? So elevatum, therefore, is the only irrefutable and uncontestable moral principle, right? Yeah, so now I've explained what morality is and what the correct moral belief is. Thank you for watching, and make sure to check out my Substack.